Welcome to the Ohms Property Podcast, your go-to guide for navigating the world of property investing. I'm your host, and in every episode, I sit down with property investors, developers, and top industry experts to share their insights, strategies, and inspiring stories. Whether you're a seasoned investor or just getting started, join us as we explore all aspects of building wealth through property. Welcome back to another episode of the Ohms Property Podcast. Today, I'm privileged to have a chat that I went on his podcast not that long ago, Kazy from Property by Kazy. How you doing, mate?
I'm good, thank you. I like the fact that you kept us in a similar location, somewhere that I'm familiar. I feel comfortable already. I'm already locked in.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for coming in, man. It's, appreciate you giving me the time to talk things through. It's actually you that inspired me to start this podcast. This is the sixth episode I've recorded.
Oh, amazing.
I'm not as highly skilled as you, because I hear that you're able to get a lot of podcasts recorded in a day. Yeah. So far, I'm doing it to 3 a day.
Oh, that's still great. Listen, after like the first two, your mouth starts to dry out a little bit.
100%.
You're a bit tired and you start to have that burnout. So yeah, doing even more than one a day, I think is already a skill.
So I've started doing that, and I thought, you know, we had such a good conversation. You inspired me to start a podcast and get some people in. You know, you've made like lots of connections over the years, and I just thought showing some of those conversations that are real life with people that are perhaps interested or growing could be a great thing to do. So if it's okay with you, if we could just don't want you to give me chapter and verse, but to give me a bit of a background into like who you are and what you do in the property space, if you can. Yeah.
So Kazy, Kazim, oi, isn't that property guy? Whatever the case may be.
Another parking ticket.
Mr. Too Many Parking Tickets or Mr. Orange Car. But ultimately, I am a property investor / developer. I've been doing it for 13 years. So I'm 35 now. Bought my first property at 22/23 and loved it. And it's like, that's the sort of the real simple story, right? Like, I bought my first house and I never looked back. Yeah. But the reality is a journey of an entrepreneur, number one, starts way earlier than that, because you have to get to the point where you've got the money to buy your first home. And number two, you have those days where you're like, I'm doing it, everything's going great, I can't wait to do this again, I'm going to do this forever, I don't want to get out of my bed or talk to anyone because I hate everything. And I think I've been all the way through it. So for anyone that, you know, is an entrepreneur and is struggling, it's just a reminder that you just have to keep going. It's the motion that keeps you moving and keeps you getting to where you want to be.
100%. Kaz, I think you're like I'm not going to blow your trumpet too much. Right?
I mean, I'm not going to complain. Okay. If you want to do it, I'll just
really, honestly, I think you're really inspiring. Like your ability and to continue doing what you're doing and putting content out there and demonstrating to the community as well. Like, this is something you can actually do and it's not out of your reach. Like, hats off to you for continuing to do that. Amazing. And you're obviously doing it and successful at doing it as well. And one of the things I thought about talking with you is around like location, right? Because I think me and you grew up in a similar area. Yeah. So I'm sort of like Bromley, that sort of patch where I was born. Parents sort of maybe moved from sort of Catford on to Bromley, that area. I think you're South East London as well.
Similar sort of thing, yeah.
Same age. And, you know, a lot of people in property, there's this kind of like north-south divide. And they're like, you got to buy property up north because it's cheap and the yield is higher and there's no money down here. There's no money. It's too expensive. London, Greater London, South East, you ain't making no money down there. Now, you seem to have not only mastered that in terms of you're making big profits, but you're also able to give back to others because there's enough opportunity for them to go and do this as well. And you're not just keeping it all just for yourself. So could you talk a little bit about like, what are your views on, so say I said to you now, property here in Liverpool to flip. Do you need to do that? And what are your focuses in terms of like area and how's that working for you?
Yeah, I think as a starting point, and I definitely just touch on, there is more than enough money to everybody to make. Yeah. You starting a podcast isn't going to stop my podcast doing well and vice versa. We can just work together. And it's that saying that I love at the moment, which is competition happens at the bottom and collaboration happens at the top. So you're just getting into property. Talk to everyone about it. The same things that me and Omar were doing 15 years ago are the same things that work now, and they work because there is unlimited opportunities. It's just about finding your own lane and being really, and just being good at it. In terms of the north-south divide, look, I completely understand. I think there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all strategy. And because we grow up in this social media world where everything's got to be a reel and there's got to be 15 seconds of the perfect advice, people are going to say, this is why you should buy a property up north. This is why you should buy a property with cash. This is why you should only ever use a mortgage. But like, you have to really work out what works for you. And for me personally, my connections, my knowledge, like where I'm based was all South London based. So if I really understand, we use Bromley as an example, I know where the catchment area is for Langley. I know that even if somebody who's outside of the area isn't going to know that's the best school in the area. So, looking at a certain property that's within that catchment area means those prices are going to be way more than one that's a few roads down. You're using your expertise to legally manipulate the market a little bit to have that competitive edge. And I think there's nothing wrong with investing up north. Like, I speak to community members and they're like, look, I've only got this amount of money, so I'm going to go there for now with the goal to come back down. But ultimately, if you're in a position where you can invest in the area you want to be in the long term, my rationale is, why would I move further afield? If the goal is, to get from A to Z and you can already operate at Z, why go through that whole process?
Sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to introduce a sponsor of the channel. Trinity Finance is a directly authorised FCA regulated mortgage brokerage. Founded in 2015 with over 30 mortgage brokers, we're really well placed to help you with all your property finance needs. Starting with first-time buyers and those moving home, we also help people remortgaging residential and buy-to-let property. Alongside that, we specialise in ground-up development, commercial lending, HMO funding, mezzanine, auction, and also your traditional buy-to-let. If that's of interest, get in contact with us via email at info@trinityfinance.co.uk, or you can give us a ring on 01322 907 000, and we look forward to hearing from you. Yeah, that's really interesting actually. And I think similar thought process for me is like, I've always said, I want to buy a property within an hour of where I live. I don't want to be traveling all over the country. I've got a close friend who's got properties absolutely scattered everywhere. Scotland, Midlands, up north and down south. And he lives somewhere in the middle of the country as well. And it's the logistical nightmare of, he's doing it at scale, but it's the management
a roofer is not going to cover from they're not going to cover from Barnsley to Blackburn to Bristol. They're going to cover one location. So now me and you will have one roofer that we know at any point in time can get on the phone and be like, look, I've got an issue in this patch. And they can look after it. Whereas you're going to have potentially 17 roofers, 6 cleaners, 27 builders, and it's very difficult to manage. And the reality is, as entrepreneurs, yes, we want to run a business. We want to be, but over time, we want the business to run itself. And I think if that's your goal and your goal is time freedom, then you want to make the business as seamless as possible. And having geographical focus and specialization means that it's a lot easier to employ specific people with a specific skill set to implement what you need to give you your time back.
That's really interesting. Kaz, couple of things then. So knowing what you do, obviously I follow you, you've got a great social media presence, you've got the PBK community where you're coaching and teaching people in there as well that are perhaps earlier on in their journey, like all the great stuff that you do. Sometimes in property, I often see this, like people start off, they might have like flipped a property, made a bit of money, and then maybe they do like a HMO, and then they're trying to, their focus is all about just trying to scale up and be better and get more and do more and become successful until one day I'm this like amazing property developer that knocked this bungalow down and built 9 flats and I've achieved everything, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but you seem to have followed something whereby you just rinse and repeat the same thing, what works in your area over and over again. And I know little about what else you've done, but I don't feel like you're someone who's like trying to change what's working. Am I right in saying that's your focus?
Yeah, and I think it took me a little while, honestly, to learn that, because I have done bits of everything. And I used to think that was like, my claim to fame, that I've done new builds, I've done conversions, I've done office to residential, residential conversions. I've done off plan, I've done buy-in, conditionally, non-conditionally. And I used to think that was such a great intro that I've done everything. And then over time, I realized, is it? Or does it mean I've just spread myself a little bit too thin? Does it mean I've not specialized? Because my background outside of property is economics. And there's this concept of the benefit of specialization, which means that even if, say, for example, we were both farmers and we're talking about growing apples and oranges, and even if you're better at doing both, there's still a benefit from us, for example, saying, you know what, you grow the apples, I'll grow the oranges. You're going to be more efficient at them. I'll be more efficient at what I do. And then we'll trade. And it's that benefit of trade. And I thought, do you know what? If, for example, I want to invest in HMOs, but that's what Omar does all the time, and it's really great in the HMO space, why don't I focus on one specific thing that I'm really good at, can become so good at it that I've got this competitive advantage that through expertise, through my team, through my experience, through my contact base, I can be amazing at this. And if then I want to focus on yield and HMOs, I can speak to Omar and maybe we can do a project together. If I want to focus on buying properties up north, I'll go to the person that does that. And if they want to focus on maybe like flipping properties, they'll come to me. So I think that's something that I really learned over time. And it's this myth almost that I think that as a business person, you've got to have 5, 7 streams of income and do them all at once. But the reality of it is more that if you focus on being great at one thing, what you'll find is over time, you will still build up these multiple streams of income, but they'll be as a result of being so good at something that you have these vertical and horizontal integration moments where, let's say you're amazing at Airbnb and you're employing loads of cleaners. At a certain point, you'll be like, you know what? We're better off starting a cleaning company because we can internalize that, or we can already service the demand. And then beyond that, we can then start to tender those out to other people. And correct me if I'm wrong, like within your space, like within the finance company and things like that, like you're able to provide services, and obviously also then there's a benefits. I think it works a lot of the time.
I think that's really valuable information that you're sharing there, because some people just chase like the golden penny or the shiny penny, and they're constantly looking for this new thing. And about 10 years ago, I took a one-day mentoring program from a very successful property guy who's probably got about 700 houses back then, big business. And he didn't really do kind of mentoring, but I kind of just like bent his arm and said, please, can you just give me one day of your time? And it was an extortionate price actually paid just to speak to this guy for a chat, for a chat. But I remember one of the things that's kind of stood in my mind, he said to me, don't get distracted trying to do things that you think will make you more money, and just keep doing the same thing over and over again that works. And what his model was BMV, BRR. So buying below market value and just refinancing over and over and over again, all family homes all across the country, and built a huge portfolio. And he never did development. He didn't go into HMOs. He didn't do anything else. He just continually did the same thing and was really successful. And I just remember thinking, if you've built that much wealth, why aren't you trying other things? But it was for a particular reason.
And it's understanding you as well. Because you could, for example, say, you know what, somebody, and the thing about property is people don't necessarily understand it as much, but kind of are trying to get into it. I'm sure you get sent people being like, I've got this plot of land for 9 million. It's potentially got outline planning for X. And you're like, okay. And like, there is this thing sometimes where you're like, am I missing out? Am I leaving money on the table? And it's that fear of missing out. But then I think you have to talk to yourself and be like, but is that really what I want to do? Is that really part of my plan? And does that risk and reward work for me? Because I could have done some really good, really interesting, probably amazing projects. But then there's not just a trade-off of will it make money? Because it might make the same amount of money if some of the stuff I've been doing similarly, maybe at scale, but like the rinse and repeat model. But then also you look at it and you're like, well, if I go and buy this land for argument's sake, £2-3 million, and then we go and get planning on it. And then now it's like, okay, but look, it sounds great because you've only got to put in whatever it may be, 50% of that initial money, and you're going to get 100% of the build cost. And the build is now 15 million. But then now you're going to have to sign a PG, like so a personal guarantee for that entirety of the build cost. So effectively you're putting your last 10 years on the line for this one project.
Oh, it's a gamble for sure if you don't know what you're doing.
Even if it makes sense and even if you know what you're doing, it's does that trade-off of the sleepless nights over the 24 months that you're in the project, is that worthwhile to you?
Are you talking about my life right now? Because I feel like you're talking to me personally about my current development I've got going on.
It is like, and it's the thing is, and I say that to say that it's not to say you shouldn't do it, but my starting point with everybody is take it back to year 9 business studies, SWOT analysis, and do that personal SWOT. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What opportunities and threats do they present? What is your risk tolerance? What do you like? What do you not like? And don't do what social media tells you should do. Don't, like, for example, do things that are vanity over value, i.e. don't say, oh, I'm going to do a rear extension just because I want to do one. What's the pound for pound return?
You're right.
And same thing with larger projects. Don't do them just because you feel like it's going to get more likes on Instagram. Don't do them because you think it's what people feel you're supposed to do. Do what you want to do.
Like, that's so true. So what's your main strategy then? So just for the people that perhaps they don't know you, I'm sure some people do, but what do you do sort of day in, day out as a property developer?
So go back to your first question, my first ever property that I bought, remember my broker at the time was like, this is a baptism of fire. You're going to use a bridging loan with no job, not the best credit. Buying at auction, but it was local to me. I was so sure on the numbers. I thought, I know friends, family that I can beg, borrow, steal in terms of their time for the refurb can make it work. And it was a 1-bedroom flat purchased from a housing association that had a separate kitchen that we could convert to a 2-bed. With an open plan kitchen, living room, change of layout, no planning, but license to alter. Now, in specific areas, you see a significant uplift. You're seeing anywhere from 25 to 30% uplift from it going from a 1 to 2-bed. If you couple that with also a property that's in a state of disrepair, potentially below market value, like you touched on, or needs something like a lease extension, there's loads of ways to add value. So that's typically what we do. And we're not necessarily adding any square footage, but we're improving the layout, improving the condition, and improving the resellability. We do now obviously do a lot more where we actually buy first floor flats. We go up into the loft and buy the loft space or air space if it's not already demised, or properties that, own the rear garden on the ground floor and do rear extensions. But it's rinse and repeat. And once you see it works on one property on the street, chances are there's going to be a lot of similar floor plans and you can replicate. And it is kind of, I guess, as a starter model, we kind of look at it as if I was to put it in a book, it would be how to make 50K flipping property in London. Because realistically, the types of deals that we're looking at, you're always going to make that as your kind of round number of what you make. The nicer areas you go to, the more money there is to make, the more work you do. Also, so we've just got one that did sort of, that Blue Peter moment, like here's one I made earlier. Bought for 420,000 and have just accepted an offer at 785, I believe.
Wow, that's amazing.
And that was with a rear extension, spent a bit more money, but effectively that's the model. And then alongside that, because it's all about pipeline, we have like the more longer term projects, which are the residential conversion. So typically by family homes that are large, generally in a state of disrepair, where we go in for planning to convert them from a single unit from anything from 2 to 9 units.
So for anyone who's watching this that's thinking like, I want to do my first property deal, would you say flipping is a good strategy for them to start with? Is that something you'd recommend?
Yeah, like, look, I that's what I advocate. It's what I do. I wouldn't advocate if I didn't do it myself. And I think it works for a number of reasons. Obviously, you create that initial value. So you're growing your working capital, because I think for me, time is the most important thing. Outside of that, your most finite resource is capital. So if you start with, whether you start with 50K, 100K, whatever your parameters are, if you're, looking to hold property, unless you get those unicorn deals that do come up, but just like a unicorn, we question whether or not they even exist. Are they a real thing? Because they come up once in a blue moon. So if you're waiting for the perfect deal, you end up waiting forever, and prices in the long term only go one way. Whereas if you can create value, let's say you start, for example, with £100,000 and you flip a property and you make, after tax, you make £35,000, £40,000. You can then, your now working cash pot is 140. So you could take that 40,000 and use that to buy, maybe a buy to let, a turnkey product, something below market value that you're going to retain for cash flow. and you still got your working capital to go again. So you're not necessarily incumbent on having to constantly try and raise funds from investors. And I think it's a good way to get in and out because of the market and the way it moves and the way interest rates move. When you're flipping property, it's very clear whether or not you're good at it or not. You start with a certain amount, you end up with a certain amount. You can just take start figure, end figure. Did I make profit? It's pretty straightforward. When you refinance, you have an idea of how much equity you have in your property based on a valuation, but it hasn't really been tested by the market. Also, in terms of your actualized value, you haven't really seen that yet because your cash flow is, well, what are your void periods going to be like? How good was your refurb? Is there any repairs? What are your associated costs going to be? And all these types of things over the time you're in the asset.
And do you actually want to be a landlord as well? Because I tell you now, not everybody, it depends, right? But there's a lot of stuff that sort of makes people not want to be a landlord. And then other people embrace it and they grow a business. Yeah. Can I ask you, so obviously flipping property, large one bed property, I would imagine 50, 60 square meters maybe, or extensions, loft conversions, getting permission to do this and converting them, flipping, selling it, getting some money back in the bank and then going again, right? What's the long-term plan for you? So like we're creating loads of wealth, okay? We're going to try and build up this gigantic war chest. And then what do you plan to do after that? I know you may be retaining property along the way, but is there an end goal or what's your plan?
I think for me, it's an interesting question because I think it's very important to have a goal. If you don't have direction, then you can get disillusioned when things don't go well. It's very easy to lose motivation. So you're very right. Whilst I always talk about flipping, I also caveat that with saying ownership and long-term wealth and the generational wealth is also important. So I hold assets that I think make a lot more sense, like, HMOs that yield a lot better, some commercial units and some flats that I think are good or maybe have value that can be added in the future. I think it's, investing in property here, overseas, but again, I think it's about the flexibility. So when you have the capital, if later down the line I say, you know what, I don't really want to do this anymore. I've fallen out of love with property. If I want to put that money into an index fund, I can. If I want to put that money maybe into something that I find quite interesting at the moment, which is investing in like emerging economies in the Airbnb space, again, I'm liquid enough, to do that. If you want to diversify a portfolio of your, an element of your portfolio maybe into crypto or into Forex or different things like that, you have the flexibility to do that. And I think when I look at how I try and structure my life, it's all about how can I do kind of what I would like to do when I would like to do it. So to go back to your question, long-term goals are to own property in 5 different continents. We're on our way to achieving that at the moment. To be able to realistically maybe live and work wherever I would like. So I like property because it gives you the safety net of having that, relatively passive portfolio if you've got the right systems in place. And then just continue, I get so much of a buzz at the moment about working with people within the PBK community. We've had some amazing success stories, like people that joined maybe without really owning many assets. Like one guy joined, had sort of 3 or 4 watches to his name as he's an ex-footballer, but had to retire really early due to injury and, made 100K in his first year and he's on track to make sort of 250K in his second year. But it's not because everybody's going to make that amount of money. And it's not just that he made this and that, but what really made it for me is when I saw that he used our mortgage broker, our architect, our solicitor, our builders, and used everybody in-house. And then so when he's now like, bro, I just got the keys or I just won something at auction, I'm just as buzzing with him as well.
I can see that, yeah. So it's sort of like, I find quite interesting about property people in general. I'm not saying everyone's like this, but it seems to be people are very often willing to share their time and expertise for free. And they're very happy to help other people along the way. And for you to have set up, a community like that, and you can directly see your not just your knowledge, because you've obviously got a serious amount of knowledge in that particular thing and broader, but also your motivation. So like actually motivating these individuals via what you're doing and demonstrating it and saying like, you know, this is achieved, this is real. Yeah. You're actually having like a direct effect on changing people's lives. So that in itself gives great satisfaction. And let's be realistic now, right? Okay. Mentoring or coaching somebody else, it may provide an income, but really if you compare that to let me just go and do what I do great, which is sourcing properties, changing them to 2-bed, flipping 3 or 4 more of them. You probably don't really need to do that, but it provides something else, which is actually probably quite rewarding to you. And I don't know if you feel that way.
It's massively rewarding. Like for people that know me, they know like, if you want to find me, go to your local David Lloyd, and I'm likely to be around either playing paddle.
I was going to say,
or doing some work from there.
Yeah,
but it's like I have these like funny moments, like where I'm like, because like making content is not fun all the time. Like let's not pretend it's not the funnest thing to do. Even like you sitting talking to a camera, you're like I don't want to do that today. But I have these moments. Like and there was one the other day. It was a lady probably in. I don't want to put an age on her just in case she watches this, but she. Old enough lady to have like a child my age.
Okay, yeah.
Well, probably not my age. I'm being ambitious for how old I think I am. A bit younger. Old enough to have a 25-year-old.
Okay.
And like I was just sort of queuing up to buy something at the cafe, and then she was like, she looked at me. You know when someone sort of does a double take, and she was like, "You're
that famous property guy."
that property guy, isn't it? It was like, I was like, oh yeah. She's like, yeah, I saw you in my living room the other day, and I was thinking. What? She's like, yeah, like my son was watching. I was like, oh yeah, like I'll tell him, like, you know, I said thank you. And she was like, no, like thank you. Like he's been watching your stuff, like he watched it religiously for the last couple of years. And like he just bought his first house. So like, thank you. And it's like these moments of forget like just the community and the people that I work with directly on a one-to-one, but these moments where you actually say, actually, you know what? Even if it's a little bit, like, you know, I've been super beneficial and super like lucky, you know, and happy that, you know, things have gone well for me. And the idea of being able to give back a little bit to help people,
100%.
You don't realize it's like sometimes I'm thinking, oh, it's a bit long. And then I check like you know, the things they're saying, oh, you've reached 1 million, 2 million people in terms of impressions this month on Instagram.
Yeah.
And like out of those people, like you might have just, even if it's like a 0.00%, and some people it made them feel like it is possible, or some people thought, actually, I am going to try, or I'm not just going to see it as something that's not for me. I think it is massively beneficial.
It's really positive, actually. And sometimes I get some distractions. I'll get businesses that get offered to me, and I'm like thinking, you know, is this a business that could be worth investing in? And when I go and look at them, I actually think, these are not positive businesses that I would want to be involved in. And when you compare that to something like the PBK, it's something you can actually be proud of as well, isn't
like
it?
It is like our proper, like, because realistically, before we started it as something that, you know, where I was receiving that, you know, financial remuneration through doing, I'd been speaking to people for the better part of 5 years, just for free, just because I'm buzzing. And I still speak to people. Like yesterday, I went into my old school and I spoke to about 150 odd, you know, young adults. They had some amazing questions. Like they were asking me about serviced accommodation, HMOs. They're already doing the research, and there's no payment for that. But I get to give back in a place where I would have loved to have seen someone that looks like me, sounds like me, came from the same place, and is just saying, look, just enjoy this process. Like enjoy the fact that you're here at school, and like you might not see the value in it at certain times, but you're going to in the future. So get as much out of every opportunity that there is there. That's
really good. What I'll do, I know from speaking to you off air that you've probably got a massive waiting list for people that would want to join the PBK community. And I don't often promote property education fully because, as you know, that's a bit of a hit and miss.
If you go back and see my old videos, I was like, education is terrible, there's whatever, but it's like...
There is some good stuff. There absolutely is. But what I will do is on the bottom of the video, I'll put a link to PBK if people want to get in contact with you, because I'm sure they can get on the waiting list for when there's spaces and stuff like that. Right, so I thought what might be quite good is to maybe give some of the viewers some tips. Because if you're watching this and you're new, or maybe you've even got into property, but you're looking at what do I do now in the current landscape of renters reform, Section 24 has been around for ages, landlords are scum, you know, all the kind of anti-landlord legislation we've had. So someone watching this and thinking like, what can I do to perhaps achieve a decent flip? So they want to go and do their first 1 to 2 bed conversion. If it's okay with you, could we just go a little bit into the intricacies without going into, giving them everything? So I thought maybe we could start with just talking a bit about sourcing. So I have my own methodology to source properties, as you probably know. And if you watch the video with me and Kazy, you'll know I do a lot of stuff in auctions. Can I delve in with you how you source, where they come from, any tips that you've got around sourcing as well?
For sure. And what I would say before getting into the sourcing is that, you always hear, like in business, like cash flow is king. In property sourcing or like having a successful flip, GDV is king. Like your end values are your end values. And the closer you can get to those being accurate means the better you are at actually appraising a deal.
So how do you do that?
Yeah, so
talk to me, how do you get the most accurate GDV? What software, tools, what are you doing to do?
So I'm quite archaic in this standpoint, in that like there are some things that I use, and there's some great platforms and things like that you can use for additional data, but I think I always say, like, start with the end goal and reverse engineer it, so go backwards. So let's say, for example, we talk about, like, a typical property flip as a 2-bed. You have to be comparing apples for apples and oranges for oranges. So there's going to be some sort of key things that are going to define the end value. Size is one you touched on. If you're converting a 1-bed to a 2-bed, chances are it's not going to be the same size as a conventional 2-bed. So you've got to find, comparables that are within that remit. The type of property. So is it, a Art Deco? Is it, a Victorian? Is it a purpose built? What type of properties? Because they're all going to have different sort of brackets, and you want to be making sure you're looking at that. Then condition, which if you know the standard of finish you're going to achieve, you're benchmarking it against, similar properties within that sort of space.
You've nailed that bit, haven't you, in your business? I've seen some of the bathrooms and kitchens are very good quality without costing the
world.
Huge amounts of money. But they really do look nice.
And that's the importance of it. And that all goes back into another section, and we'll talk about that. But it's also understanding pound for pound return. There's amazing tiles at 20 square meters. There's amazing tiles at 100 square meters. There's great Lamona ovens. There's great Miele ovens. But knowing when to use what is the real sweet spot of getting your refurb right. But going back to the comparables, so we've said about size, finish, building type. You've then got, like, your proximity to, local amenities. So that whether that be proximity to transport links, shopping centers, schools, etc., and then the actual amenities. So do you have a driveway? Do you have a garden? And I think those things, like, as a starting point, if you take those 4 to 5 parameters and really make sure that when you're looking at similar properties, people, when they do deal appraisals, sometimes people get stuck in this hope deal appraisal where they'll see, like, what I saw, there was one property for 600K, like completely out of the ballpark. You want to ignore the anomalies straight away. Like, there's going to be a reason why that is where it is.
So what you need, you're saying like at least 3 comparables within a close proximity.
If you're looking at London, we're high density, 1/4 of a square mile, even less, like sometimes you want comparable properties. Now, I think, like, you take a weighted basket of averages. So for me,
this is the economics degree coming out here, guys.
Yeah, it is. So it is. And I hark back to it, and I randomly, as a side note, I kind of all over the place sometimes, but that's good. A lot of people bash, like, education and higher education, but one thing is that whether it's you study media, whether it's that you study economics, business, history, English literature, you're going to find ways to use that skill set in your business because of the way you communicate, because of the way you can analyze, because your ability to, for example, to be able to project the way you talk and engage with other people. So it's not always, does it get you your dream job? A lot of the time is, does it give you a skill set? And then also does it allow you to understand the value of getting up and doing something when nobody's telling you to? Because no one tells you to go to class. You have to go. And if you don't go, no one cares. You still pay. But so the weighted basket of averages. So we look at, so I'm going to say, I'm going to take some current market data because that's live. Because it's great to look at, land registry data, but that's 12 months old at this point, and markets can move quite quickly at times. So I'm going to look at previous sold data from the land registry. I'm going to look what's currently listed on the market, and then also a conversation with local agents, because when you're asking for end values, they're going to give you more of an accurate when you're not listing something with them. When you go to list something with an agent, they're going to tell you, I know I think it's 500, but to make sure I get the listing, I'll probably get you 575 all day long, mate.
There's a couple of agents in the southeast London that their tactic is actually that, isn't it?
It's like, been that from the dawn of time.
We'll get them on at 600 and then we're going to hammer them down every 2 weeks.
Reduction. Yeah. And it is so. But having those conversations with agents, and then so for me personally, it's quite a new software. I definitely, I don't know, can I say it?
Of course, yeah,
so
absolutely.
I recommend checking out something called Boom.
Boom, okay.
So they're pretty new, but they, I think, are going to disturb the market.
Really?
So in your looking at land deals, they help do a lot of the stuff that Land Insight and things like that do. But for a fraction of the price. I think they cost,
I'll check them out for sure. Yeah,
they cost I think you're looking for other platforms are like £200 to £300 a month. Yeah. They cost £250 for the year to use.
Oh wow!
And they're really good for comparables. Yeah. So you can put in your local property, that you're looking at. It will bring up the sold comparables on a map. You can use it to find out if you're in a conservation area, buildings listed, if you've got TPOs, plannings, and so it does. You can even really compare price per square foot based on even down to the side of the street. So when we talk about local knowledge, you need to do your own due diligence because no software is perfect, but then use that to kind of help to narrow down. So starting point when we're talking about finding deals is get really good at comparables. So I think auctions are a great example, and I love auctions because you get that instant feedback. It's going to be a guide price. Doesn't matter. That's just banner. Yeah. Same way there used to be starting bids for cars on eBay for 99p. Yeah. There's always going to be a guide price. That's really marketing. Start with what you think your GDV is. Then whether you can do it or through getting quotes for contractors, work out what your build cost is going to be and deduct that. Once you've deducted your build cost, you're then going to have your purchasing costs. So deduct your purchasing costs, which are going to include like your stamp duty, legals, depending on where you're getting it from, potentially auction fees, solicitor costs that you need to consider. Then you need to deduct your cost of finance. Then you're going to deduct your selling costs, which are going to be your agents, and we can include in that also your holding costs, like your, ground rent, insurances, council tax, etc. Then finally, you need to deduct your professional fees, and that's going to depend on what you're doing. Like if you're doing HMO conversions, you're going to you're in an Article 4 area. You're going to, for example, need full planning. You're going to need building regs. You're going to need the architectural drawings. If you're doing what I do, you maybe need to budget in and factor in for a license to alter agreement, maybe some building regs, maybe some architectural drawings, but factor in all of your professional costs. I think people miss out loads of things. And when you do deal analysis, you have to make sure you get everything right. So you've started at that endpoint and your GDV is maybe 500K. You've maybe deducted 50, then 40, then 10, then 20. And that will say, okay, so realistically, after you deduct all of those things, you're going to have, what profit number do I want to make or margin do I want to make? And you deduct that. And then that's going to lead you to be what realistically is your max bid, whether that's on the open market or whether that's auction. And I think if you know where your offer comes from, it's a lot easier to convey that offer to an agent and be like, look, lovely property. I'm not just lowballing you for the sake of it, but I'm a buyer. This is like my goal. This is what I'm going to be doing. So I'm more than happy to offer this based on this. But if you are offering less, I think negotiation is where you can bridge the gap between the asking price and what you want to offer. It's because, look, I'm going to offer slightly lower, but what I would say is I will complete in X period of time. Yeah. I will, for me personally, I'm not going to do a home buyer survey. I know there's damp. I know there's mold. I know those floors are uneven. I'm not going to come back and knock you. This is my price, and this is the honest price I'll pay for the property. I'll complete in X period of time, and understanding what the buyer wants and giving them that, because there's a thing that someone said to me a long time ago, which is interactions create transactions. And what's going through my head as you're saying this around estate agents, I speak with them very regularly. I used to work in a big chain of estate agents. Is if you're sort of like thinking, right, I'm going to source property, I'm going to try and find something, and you've put some offers in, and you may have to put in a number of offers, and you go through this systematic process of like starting with a GDV, scaling back and being like, right, unless I'm going to kind of make 30K or 50K as a minimum, it doesn't work for me. So here's my offer.
And one of the things I sort of found that maybe some people don't do, which would be a good tip for them, is if they put the offer in, like you've just said, they clearly say, these are the reasons, like this is all I'm going to tell you now, here's all the costs, here's what I could pay, and this is what I would want to do in the end with it. But it's actually like communicating that properly with the estate agent and saying like, if this doesn't get agreed, like we've had an interaction, I've met you now, we know, we've shown me the property, there's been some time spent doing this thing. If you get anything else, which is like similar to this or same as this, you now know what I'm looking for.
You know my parameters.
Yeah, correct. Rather than just here's my offer, see you later, never interact with that person again. Because you're just having to work like really hard to keep doing that over and over again.
And if you imagine the process as well, like you're selling something and it could be a house, it could be a sandwich. You're selling something, you got a sign that says £2. If you just kind of give somebody a fly-by-night offer, it's the equivalent of someone being like, I give you 50p and then walking off.
Yeah.
Like you're gonna potentially offend and like, you're not gonna build that relationship. And when they say people buy from people, it's very true. If people see that, he's not just here to take the mick, this is his genuine offer, they'll be like, okay, I can't accept it, but I'm not offended. And if, for any reason, I'm still in a position where I need to sell in 2 months' time, I'm sure we've got 10 low offers, but yours is the one I understood more and yours is the one that I remember. And another really good point, I think, and it's something that we should remember from our mums, our dear mums, is that, growing up, I'm sure all of us were told, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. If you don't understand somebody's motivation behind selling, how can you give them what they want? So like, I talk to people all the time that are doing, deal sourcing or are doing like, rent to rent. And they've just got, they say, this is how I pitch. And I'm like, but don't pitch, just listen. Because sometimes people's thing is, I want someone that's going to really look after my home. And you sell them on the basis of, well, if you can do that, explain how. I've had properties that I've bought for, I think my offer was actually 30, 40K less than other people. But I'm saying, look, it was a family home that they previously lived in. 3 generations had grown up in it, had kind of fallen into a state of disrepair, unfortunately due to old age and a slight neglect. And I said, look, like this is what I can offer. But what I can tell you is like, when you see this house again, you're not going to believe it. It's going to go back to that one I can see in the pictures on the walls and it's going to look great. And another family, I'm not going to enjoy it. I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to buy it for myself. But another family is going to get an opportunity to create memories in this house because I'm going to bring it back to its former glory. And understanding the motivation behind sellers is one of the best ways of getting a deal across the line.
Yeah, amazing. Really good tips. So it's actually connection, isn't it? It's how you can connect with people. I'm thinking back to a situation where there was a property for sale. I don't want to give the exact details, but it went online. It was all a bit messy actually, but the sellers were highly motivated, but also a bit strange. Nice people, but just the motivations were all a bit strange. And I viewed the first day it went on Rightmove, and 5 or 6 other people also viewed, and it was listed too cheap. It was one of these scenarios where an agent's put a property on too cheap, and it's going to go for crazy money. And I viewed and put my offer in, which was suitable based on what I wanted to do with it, which was way lower than some of the other people that had offered. And I remember putting in the offer and the agent saying that's way too much. I can tell you now that they're not going to accept it. And I said, well, just to let you know, I have spoken with the sellers. We've made like a really good connection. The property is in an area where I grew up. We've spoken at length and there was a real kind of in detail conversation. I said to them, if for any reason anything happens and any of these other people can't perform, I'll still be here. And I just left it like that. And this sale got tied up to someone else. They didn't perform. The motivation of the sellers became higher. They then came back to me and they said, Omar, are you still here? I said, I'm still here. It's not changed, but this is the price. It won't be that. And we performed and we bought that property. And so sometimes it's not always first time round. It can be second time. I'm sure you've had that.
I had it, this property over in Brixton. Like, it was very distinctive. Like, again, probate sale, lady unfortunately passed the previous owner, but she could tell she had a lot of flair, like a lot of personal touches, bright purple kitchen, bright orange living room, like green coming down the stairs.
And then you turn up in your orangey red car and she's like, oh, I like this guy.
So unfortunately, like, I wasn't there to meet her because she'd passed.
But, I see. Apologies.
But the property, the thing about it was that it was so distinctive that everybody that had seen it online knew that property. And when I posted that I'd bought the property, I got messages from friends. My auntie said, I offered on that one. They told me it was sold. And I was probably the 10th person through the door.
Really?
And I offered, and it, like I actually didn't offer when they all offered, but somebody didn't perform. But because I had we'd spoken to the agent, I just said the same thing. Like, look, if it doesn't, like, I'm still here, like, built a good relationship, and through like deal sources that I used, I ended up being the one that was able to buy it. So you're very right. Like, you have to work within your own parameters of what you can offer. But sometimes it's just the communication of letting people know why it is where it is, how you differ potentially from other buyers, because somebody has a bad experience with somebody that promises them the world and doesn't deliver. The idea of, actually, that person told me they can't do what they do, but they told me this is what they can do, and they were very transparent about how they perform. We talk
communicating. It's just the communicate. You've got to communicate exactly your intentions, haven't you?
It's communication, and it's your personal credit history. Like, we talk all the time about your actual credit history of like Experian and Equifax, but you actually have it's integrity, but it's a credit history. If you've got a track record of performing, a track record of saying, if I say I'm going to pay you this, I will do. If I say I'm going to complete by this date, then I will do. Then people remember that. And because you have high credit, people are willing to take, slightly more risk with you, which means they may say, okay, look, off the back of that, you don't have to exchange today. We'll let you exchange in 2 weeks, because we know that when you say something, your word is your word.
So you've started at the top, you've GDV, you've worked back, you've watched this video, and you thought, well, I'm going to find myself my first flip. And you say, okay, the numbers work, right? Now I'm stuck in this analysis paralysis area where I'm looking at this spreadsheet over and over again, and I'm like, right, 30 to 50K profit. But what if? Yeah. What if the market comes down a bit? What if my build cost goes up a bit? What if I've never done this before? Like, what all these what ifs? How does someone just like take that step forward? Because I think back to the first ever flip, right? And it was good, but I sort of think to myself, I probably still would have done it even if I just made 10K or 5K, just as I need to do my first. Then you meet these other people that they just can't get off the Excel spreadsheet. So what would you say is advice for someone who just needs to move forward with something?
And this is fine, because it's almost sounding like a pitch for the PBK community.
Here we go.
It isn't, but that's really common.
It's a sounding board.
I get that all the time, and it's that, when you do get stuck, like, one of the resources that we have within the spreadsheet is your what if analysis. So again, like, coming from an economics background, half of my is based around Excel and macros. So it is that what if. What if sale prices go down? What if your build costs go up? What if it takes longer so your finance costs go up? You can test it with all of those parameters, and you can offer in a place that you feel is safe for you. You can't be overly safe, otherwise you'll never get a deal done. And I think one of the things of why we built it is because, unlike other businesses, mistakes in property are expensive. And they often come from not having the right people in your corner. So if you have access to a great architect who says, those plans will be fine, a great solicitor that says, I've looked over the legals, read the auction pack, for example, it's pretty safe. You have access to a finance broker that's saying, look, like, you know what? I'm not going to get you the cheapest product. I'm going to get you the most fit for purpose product. Like, you're scared that your friend told you their deal took 24 months. I'll get you a product that's got, it's a 12-month product, but you have an option to extend up to 24 months with no penalties. So using stuff that's fit for purpose to help lower your risk and having the right people in your corner is really important. But then beyond that, what you said in terms of the numbers, if you're trying to make £40,000 from your first deal, ideally you want to make that. But realistically, if you've got the money sitting in your bank and it's making you nothing in interest, relatively speaking, even making £10,000 to £15,000 safely, what you're going to earn in learning in non-tangible value through the experience, through the confidence, through the relationship building, through the expertise is going to be worth it. So if you're currently sitting in that analysis paralysis, yes, do your due diligence till you're blue in the face. But at some point you have to jump. Like, if your goal is to swim, you can watch as many YouTube videos as you like. You can sit down with an instructor, but at some point you have to get in the water and start to use all of those techniques that you've learned. And yes, you may have the the metaphorical equivalent of the armbands to keep you safe, but you have to try and you have to do it.
Yeah, totally. Just thinking about something again that I think my tolerance to risk is above average, not intentionally. And I think that tolerance maybe has gone up a bit and then it came back, and it's depending on experiences that have happened to you. But one of the things I've always sort of said to myself is, what's the worst thing that could happen to me? If I do this, what's the absolute worst thing that could happen to me? And I kind of never, ever want to put myself in a position where I'm literally going to lose the shirt on my back. And, I'm a family man. I need to at least be able to put food on the table. And when I think back to kind of like a younger version of myself, working like multiple jobs and then trying to get a pot of money together to do a first flip, I sort of think to myself, even if I didn't make anything and I just got that knowledge, like you said, like if that was the worst thing that could possibly happen to myself, would have been great to make, like you said, 40K, but I still think I probably would have just done it. And that's the thing, isn't it? It's saying to yourself, like, what could go wrong? And if you're willing to accept that risk of what could go wrong, then that kind of maybe eases people to make that jump.
And I think one thing I have to say is, look, the reality is, even in a scenario where we kind of try and work out everything, the reality is loads can go wrong. But if you live your life like that, loads can go wrong by driving to work. The worst you happen is you get hit by a bus. Like, so the reality of the worst, but it's the worst within reason. And I think that's where you have to find that balance between what's the worst that could go wrong versus what's the worst that's maybe likely or possible to go wrong, and kind of find a realistic,
that's really good advice, definitely. So we're now with GDV. We're back. We've sense checked. We've checked the worst. We've done our what if analysis, and we've stepped forward. Right. We spoke like about sourcing, right? So just a couple of tips from your perspective. We can talk a bit about auctions if you like, or we can talk about buying via an agent or direct to vendor. Like, what's your strategy for sourcing? And if you had to give someone a tip, how can they find these amazing 1-bed to 2-bed conversions in Brixton that make 100K? Like, what's the tip?
I think honestly speaking, I would love to tell you, like, are you just, nobody knows, but there's a secret back alley and you knock 3 times on the door and you just say my name and they give you a deal. Unfortunately, that's not the case. It does, it's an inverse pyramid. You have to start with knocking on, metaphorically speaking, a lot of doors. So you're spending, if you're sourcing online through the open market, you're spending a lot of time on Zoopla and Rightmove. You can reduce that by having really good alerts set up, that bring about the type of properties that you're looking at in the type of area within the right sort of price point. If you're using Zoopla, for example, you can use keyword searches like cash buyers, like probate, like DIY, the things that are going to bring up the type of properties that potentially that you are looking for. So have your search parameters strong. I buy properties through deal sources, through auctions, through the open market, and through direct to vendor. And it's probably a healthy mix of all of them. But the reality is, you can see a property online with a really low guide price at auction. Doesn't mean that's what it's going to sell for. You can see a property, through a deal source. It doesn't mean they've done the numbers right. So it still goes back to, unfortunately, you have to do the hard work. But I think you have to understand that, if you look at 100 properties, maybe 20, 30 of them are suitable that you go on viewings for. Of the ones you go on viewings for, you maybe put in 5, 10 offers. Of those offers, maybe 1 gets accepted, maybe 2 get accepted, and 1's fall out. So it is a numbers game, and that's the reality of it. But the more you do it, the more you start to hone that process, and the less you have to do. Also, the more you do it, the more you build relationships. So rather than we spoke about, mutual friends that we have, that you're probably second on his list of people to call. I'm probably 7th, just down to relationships.
I thought you was going to say first for a second there.
No. I know who's first. We both know who's first.
Yeah,
and you're still doing well at second. But again, it's relationships. The amount of time I've transacted with that person doesn't compare to you. So you're higher up, but there's people that I have much better relationships with. And so you find that balance of finding the right deal. But I do say, look, there isn't that magic shot because of supply and demand. If a deal's amazing, like you spoke about the property that was underpriced, through market conditions, that exceptional profits get competed away. I'll offer an extra 10,000, I'll offer an extra 15, and before you know it, the margins are a lot smaller. So there isn't that magic deal place. But what I would say is how you can, I guess, exploit a market is by having information that other people don't have. So the one bed that's on the open market, a lot of people are looking at this purely as a one bed, whether it be in a bad state, good state, they're looking at it as a one bed. So their GDV can only hit a certain ceiling. For you that has the expertise to know how to convert it to a two bed, understanding, firstly, the types of things to look out for. So if you're not aware, all livable rooms, living rooms, bedrooms require natural light. So your windows of where they are is going to be really important. Then sizing parameters, you're going to need your bedrooms to be a certain size. Master bedroom, we're sort of targeting 12 square meters, second bedroom, at least 8 square meters, open plan kitchen, living space, 20 square meters. So you can quickly, when you're playing around, being okay, does it meet these parameters? Then you need to think about things like drainage runs, because your big waste pipe, if your drainage is at the front of the property, but your bathroom's currently at the rear, to get it from front to the rear, if your joists run horizontally across the property, are going to be nigh on impossible. No one wants to use a Sani flow or, a macerator. So you need to think about, is what works on paper actually practical in practice? So really understanding the intricacies of what these types of deals look like, and having that information is going to set you ahead of your competitors.
Yeah, I mean, you're giving out some real tips now, and some technical tips as well. So I really think the viewers are going to get a lot of value from it.
Hopefully.
I like to finish each podcast with a recommendation. This could be either a book you've read, a website you use, or something that you just think would be a really good tip for anyone really in property that's looking to gain some knowledge from something. Have you got anything you could recommend?
Books wise, I say this in every pod. My favorite book is going to be one of the Harry Potter series.
Okay.
Big Harry. So that's not going to help you. But I say that to say, do what you enjoy.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I would say, I'd say at the moment, I'm really loving Boom. I'm loving what they do price point wise. I think that's an amazing resource to use where you don't have to commit hundreds of pounds a month. You can commit sort of, I think it's gone up recently, but 30 odd pounds, to really get an idea of how to do deal analysis, how to appraise a deal, using software when you're not confident. You spoke about doing the what if analysis, being able to appraise deals, being able to look at comparables. If you've got software that you can use that helps you feel more comfortable with that, I think you're in a great place to actually get out of the analysis paralysis place. But I think just doing, we speak about mindset a lot and mentality, and whilst that is important, mindset and mentality with no actions never turns dreams into reality.
I know that this conversation is going to inspire a lot of people, and I know people are going to take some tips away from it. Yeah. So hopefully it does, and maybe you can come back in a year or so if you're around to join us for another conversation.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Thank you so much for joining us, making the trip. Guys, if you enjoyed this podcast/video, like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you at the next one.